August 24th, 1:30. And let's go with roll call.
Okay.
Got a call voice. Okay, and BC is not present or.
Gimme is here to
Represent. Okay, great. Do you have a quorum? Members are present. Well prepared.
You didn't know, I promise. It was a total random.
Aaron, would you go ahead and do the public announcement?
AMATS committee meetings are open to the public, and the public is provided an opportunity to comment at each meeting. Business items are first presented by staff or consultant. Then the committee is given an opportunity to ask questions. After that, the business item is then open to the public for formal comment. Each participant will have 3 minutes to speak on the topic. A couple of housekeeping items. If you're joining us virtually and you're not a member of the committee, please turn your camera off when you're not speaking on an item. If you're joining us by phone, to mute and unmute the microphone, press *6. Thank you.
Thank you. Members committee, you have agenda there in front of you. I have a motion to approve the agenda.
To approve.
Moved by Lisa.
Mr. Chair, actually, I don't know if now would be a good opportunity. I would like to add an item to the agenda that's time sensitive. Staff has prepared the letter, AMATS staff in consultation with Parks and Rec, on a project that we have currently programmed on the STIP, the Fish Creek Trail Connection. Program to use STBG funds for design and right of way in years 2023 and 2024. The reason this is time sensitive is because a private citizen, it appears, is requesting to use that would effectively prevent the project from moving forward. And the railroad meets very soon in September to discuss that lease proposal. So if we could take the opportunity today to review this letter and vote as a policy committee to adopt the letter and send it to the Alaska Railroad, that would be good.
Move to amend the agenda to add this item.
No, second.
Any other comments, questions related to this?
So I have an item. It's a bit unusual, I apologize, but I was contacted by DOT yesterday that they are going to be seeking a 180-day extension of the 2020 through 2023 STIP and from FHWA. In order to receive that extension, they need already given their concurrence, and so they're just waiting to see if AMATS will give their concurrence. So I have a letter drafted that I'd like to bring to the committees for your consideration and possible approval today as another action item on the agenda, if you would permit. It is very time sensitive because we just told that it has to be in before the end of the public comment period, which ends September 3rd.
So I'll make a motion to add that item to the agenda.
Thank you.
Great. We'll set both of these under the action items portion there of the agenda.
Yeah.
Sure. Anything else?
Move to the agenda as amended.
Second.
Cross and second, Mr. Boland. In opposition? Agenda is approved. And for agenda item 4, we do have, of course, the minutes from July 27th for approval.
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any questions, changes, discussion needed, required? 20 minutes. Okay. Hearing none, then minutes are approved from July 27th. And so moving to our action items, 5A. Aaron, you will represent us.
It'll be me for most of today, so I apologize. So the first item is TIP amendment, or TIP admin mod number 1. Just as a reminder, admin mods are typically a lower level version of changes to the TIP. They're not the same as amendments. Amendments require air quality conformity determination, 30-day public comment period. Administrative modifications only require a committee. Or just making, corrective errors in the document. So the reason this modification is coming before us today was primarily based on a request from the Public Transportation Department. They needed to update their funding in FY23. What happens is funding comes into the state for the transit funding, and there is a split that happens between the railroad and the Public Transportation Department. So they have one pot of funding, they split it between the two parties. Those parties get together and then they decide on a split letter. So that split letter was recently signed and the changes were needed to be made ASAP in the TIP. At this time, we also took advantage of making some other changes in the TIP that need to be put in here before the end of the fiscal year. So first changes, table 2 roadway. One of the big changes here is for the O'Malley Road reconstruction project, adding $4.65 million for utilities and construction overrun. The reason this meets the thresholds is because in the policies and procedures number 5 for AMATS, anything that's currently under construction and needs a cost increase like this, it's kind of automatically moved forward. And it's just reflected in here for information purposes. We do have the ability to remain fiscally constrained. You may remember that there was SRSA money that was shifted around that had to be used in 23 kind of immediately, and it freed up about $6.1 million in the program. So there's more than enough to absorb this $5 million or $4.6 million overrun. In FY23 for the East Signals 4th Avenue lighting and signal upgrade. Based on feedback from the project manager, this additional funding is not needed in FY23. Increase the funding in FY23 and 24 for the pavement replacement program to reflect the cost increases and to balance the remaining program. And then change the funding source for the pavement replacement program in FY23 from STBG to SRSA. That $6 million for SRSA went to a pavement replacement project. And then to remove the FY23 SRSA funding from the 3rd Avenue signals and lighting upgrade, as it was moved from there to the pavement replacement program. You will see some more changes later on when we do the next amendment that also help clean up all the SRSA funding as well. So, but it was amendment level threshold, so we couldn't do it as part of this admin mod. Number 3, or table 3, non-motorized, just a couple of quick changes here. Removed $100K in the 23 funding for the downtown trail connection. It was not needed by the project at this time. The project is still on schedule and moving forward nicely. And then we moved $400K from FY23 to 24 for the Fish Creek Trail connection. It was based on feedback from the project team that they are not going to be able to obligate that money in 23 and instead need it for 24. And then add $453K in the FY23 Anchorage Area Pathway and Trail pavement replacement for a project in that pot of funding. And then we have the transit funding, as you can see here. A lot of it is just increasing the funding that they show for their preventative maintenance, bus stop improvements, the ITS, the fleet improvement, and the transit center support facilities projects to reflect that split letter. The Technical Advisory Committee reviewed this amendment or the admin mod, and they are recommending approval to the Policy Committee. Thank you.
Thank you there. Any comments or questions from members of the committee? Okay. Any comments from the public on this item? Hearing none. What is the will of the committee?
I'll move to approve AMATS STIP administrative modification agreement.
Second.
Okay. So moved by Mr. Boyce, seconded by Mr. Bowen. Any objections? Okay, motion is approved.
Thank you.
On to 5B. Back to you.
Yep. Okay, so 5B is an update for you all on something that we haven't seen for a while, but kind of seen part of. So you may remember we had the UPWP, the Unified Planning Work Program, recently approved by the Policy Committee for 24 and 25. So the UPWP is AMATS's program that pays for staff time. So what tasks are staff going to be doing over the next 2 years? So what happens is there is a pot of funding called PL funds that come to the state to fund planning efforts throughout the state. And then MPOs are typically given a portion of these funds to cover their efforts because, you know, MPOs have a lot of requirements that they have to meet for certain things like the MTP, the TIP, the UPWP, the public participation plan, and kind of all the efforts that we have to do as staff. As part of that process, the state is given an option to work with the MPOs to develop a formula on how that split happens between the MPOs. The last formula was done in 2014, I believe. And so it's being updated this go around because MVP is coming online as a new MPO out in the Matsu borough. So it's okay, we're going from 2 MPOs to 3. So how's that split going to be happening? So in the past, the split was based on a couple of different factors such as population, status of planning, air quality, and then in growth factors about how fast is the region growing or not. So this go around, the state reached out to AMATS, FAST, and the pre-MPO MVP and sat down and kind of our take on this split and what we should be using. It was ultimately decided 2 major things that you'll see in the memo before you. First is what the annual allocation is, part A. So the annual allocation is expected to be based on the urbanized areas of the MPOs. Now, just as a reminder, there are 2 kind of boundaries for the MPOs. Urbanized areas is like the core of the MPO that's designated by the census. And that determines what MPO size you are. Are you a less than 200,000 or 200,000 or greater? Or I think there's other ones over 1 million. And then the reason the urbanized area boundary was selected is because it's a set process by the feds. The census does that, whereas the MPO boundary is set by the policy committee. And so we wanted to kind of take out any of that fluctuation that can happen depending upon who's on the policy committee of each MPO and just leave it as like everybody is treated fairly based on what the feds are deciding is our urbanized area. And so as you can see in front of you, Anchorage, AMATS MPO leaves about 66.63% of the urbanized area population. FAST, Fairbanks MPO, 19.09. And then the Knik Fairview Wasilla, the MVP MPO, is 14.29%. So those percentages are going to be used to break out the funding appropriately. So AMATS is going to get 66.63% of the overall funding for our planning purposes. Basically, what that means is tiny increase, but not anything significant. It's greatly appreciated that the state was willing to work with us on this. And then FAST and is going to see a small little bit, and then MVP will also see a small bit to help them get going. Just a note, one of the things about this allocation, it's also the same for the FTA funding that comes in. So AMATS is part of this consolidated planning grant where we get FHWA and FTA in one location. And then we give our FTA funding over to Public Transportation Department for them to do their efforts. The formula for FHWA funds will be the same for the FTA funds. So everybody's kind of treated fairly. And that was all developed in cooperation with the Public Transportation Department and other transit providers in the MPOs. And last thing on the allocation, the group decided that this allocation and urbanized area population data should be updated every census and then every 5 years using the American Community Survey. So the American Community Survey is kind of an estimate done by the Census Bureau in between the census, the 10-year census. So it's a way to basically be like, here's what the census in 2020 said. What are we looking at in 2025? Are we still 66.63 or are we higher or lower than that? And then where is MVP? Because, you know, they're a huge, fast growing area that may need some more help. I will note one thing. This is based on the current apportioned PL funds. We don't know in the future if FHWA is going to give more PL funds to the state because we have a third MPO, which, you know, we don't know what it's going to look like. So there may be some up and down years depending on how things go. So we'll keep everyone kind of appraised of what's happening with this. Part B is just a kind of a new thing that was added in. Sometimes at the end of a UPWP cycle, there is leftover funding that was not able to be used for various reasons. That funding goes back to the state, and the state has the option to do what they will with it because, you know, the MPOs were given an opportunity. They didn't take it. It's going, or, you know, something happened. They weren't able to spend it. So it goes back to the state. What DOT has agreed to and, you know, pushed forward and recommended is those deobligated funds or those leftover funds are made available to the MPOs the next year. So if AMATS has $100,000 it didn't use in 24, then in 25, we have the option to capture that 100,000 for some additional efforts that are needed. If multiple years pass and the MPOs don't use that, it goes back into the fund and then the other MPOs are made available to put in an application for, hey, we could use 100,000 for this effort that we need to do. All of this will be determined on the MPOs and the state getting together and having a formal discussion and everyone on agreement with it. So it's been a very collaborative process. It's very appreciated that DOT is working so closely on this. And this is before you for your review and recommend approval. The TAC did review this and they're also recommending your support of this PL distribution formula. Thank you.
Anything from the committee? Questions, comments, concerns?
So I do have a question. Okay, then Aaron, on the spreadsheet
Mhm.
of this document, is it, it's the 3.8 million that is the unobligated that we would be returning? What are we returning to the state, I guess?
So
There's 2.3 million.
it's not actually broken out per NPO. That's just the total fund. So at the bottom of the Excel spreadsheet, you'll see FY23 end of year balance unobligated PL funds. That's the total amount of unobligated PL funds in there in a pot of funding that can be used if an NPO has a recommendation for it. We did meet on that particular item and the group agreed that NBP has kind of the biggest need right now. And so we recommended that they kind of get first crack at that funding. They need about $2 million to get themselves going because they have no time basically to do an MTP and a TIP, and they're still not even set up as an MPO. So there's a lot of hurdles that they have to overcome. So right now, AMATS is, you know, doing well with its funding, and I didn't have anything to provide them as justification for why we should be taking some of that money. Trying to keep a small little balance in case an emergency happens, I think like $300,000 or $400,000. But it's definitely, you know, in the future, if more comes available, we'll let everybody know and see if there's something that we can recommend and grab some money for.
Thanks.
Yes. Any comments from the public on this item? Hearing none, what's the role of the committee on this action item?
I guess move to approve the agreement that is needed. Okay.
I'm close enough. We'll make it work. Thank you.
Second.
Approved and seconded. Any objections? It's approved. And moving on to item 5C, Aaron, I'd like to go back to you.
Yes, sir. Okay, everybody, as you know, that the 24 through 27 STIP is out for public comments. The public comments end September 3rd. And what you see before you are the comments that I, working the rest of AMATS staff, drafted based on our review of the STIP. I had a lively discussion with the technical advisory committee, so I'll save that as that was already been done. And just let you know, there are three areas of this letter that's broken down. Overall comments, typically, thank you for your efforts. It's really appreciated. You know, some aspects of the STIP are heading in a really positive direction, especially with the interactive maps and providing a lot more funding for people to be able to see, especially the funding tables. Then you have the major concerns, which I'll get into in a moment. And then you have the technical comments, which I'll do a brief discussion on. So there are 6 major concerns that I wanted to kind of briefly touch on. First is that the federal requirements are the state develop the STIP in cooperation with the MPOs designated for the metropolitan area. There was no coordination with AMATS prior to the document being released for the 45-day public comment period. Just as comparison of what AMATS does with the state for the development of our STIP, the state is involved in the development of the criteria, development in the nomination process, development in the scoring and ranking of projects, development in the selection of projects to put into the TIP and develop the TIP, and the air quality conformity determination. It's also involved in the approval and continued maintenance of the TIP. So it's a little concerning that there was no outreach in any way, shape, or form to the MPOs prior to this document being released. Even a quick heads-up meeting with me would have been appreciated, because we would have been able to catch a number of the errors that we list on this document. So the intent is not to bash people for their efforts. It's just to make people aware that something was missed, and hopefully moving forward, these things can be caught and dealt with as we go on. I would not, be doing my job if I didn't bring these comments forward to you. So I am going out on a limb here, so please bear with me. Next comment. There seems to be some missing information from the STIP website or document in terms of the process used to select projects. This is especially concerning for AMATS because we typically would just accept whatever projects the state gave us and add them to the TIP, because we recognize that the state has its process that it goes through for selecting projects, so scoring and ranking, project evaluation board, all these kind of stuff. None of that information was provided as part of the STIP document or on the website about what data was used to select the projects, what scoring was used, what the ranks of projects were used. How did this project get in and one other project not get in? It's kind of an essential, basic part of the transportation planning process, so the public can see what's going on as well as us as professionals. I work in this field and I cannot find this information, so I can only imagine what it's like for a member of the public. Number 3, this one's a hard one, so I can understand, but there's nothing in the STIP about achieving the targets, the performance measures and targets that are set. As you know, AMATS supports the state in their performance measure targets. We routinely bring those to you all for approval. And part of the federal requirements of the STIP will contain something in there that talks about how these STIP projects will be achieving the performance measures. There's maybe a half a page that talks about it. I don't think that meets the requirements, as AMATS just recently got a corrective action on the 4 to 5 pages we have in our TIP not meeting this performance measure discussion. So I would love to work with the state and coordinate with them on how we can both develop this for both the STIP and the TIP, and maybe make it kind of a uniform thing for us and maybe FAST if they're interested, or MVP. Number 4, there's some issues with project costs not matching up, so I provide the example there. The reason this is important is it calls into question fiscal constraint. If you're saying a project is costing $330 million, but then you look up and actually manually add the totals and it's $431 million, that's a concern. And we rely on the state to assure us that their document is fiscally constrained when we add those projects to the TIP. Number 5, there was an error with the allocation for AMATS for CTP and TAP. CTP is our STBG. It's a weird thing that they have in there that I comment on later. It was about a $4 million difference between the two, which is pretty significant for us. That's a lot of effort for us to deal with. So I did reach out to program development staff. They explained the issue, but I'm asking in this letter to please ensure that that is corrected in the STIP when it goes final. We rely on the state to give us the accurate allocation every year, because it sets an unrealistic expectation when the public looks at this, they see our TIP and they see a $4 million difference and want to know what's going on. And so it'd be nice if we could get the numbers correct. And number 6, this was added by the Technical Advisory Committee. It is another federal requirement that the STIP shall be consistent with the approved MTP of an MPO. Looking at the STIP, there are 4 projects in there that are not included in the AMATS approved MTP. And I have those listed before you here. And the recommendation is those projects should be removed from the STIP until we can add them, if that's what the policy committee agrees upon, to the MTP, and then they can later be added to the STIP. Just as a note, we as AMATS will have to make some corrections as well and remove them from our TIP because they were included in there and they should not have been. So we are, this calls out the state, but AMATS has a role to play in this as well, and we need to correct our mistakes. I will say in the past, FHWA has been a little more lenient about this, because if you had projects in your draft MTP, they said that's close enough, we're okay, you're going to approve it in the next year, it's okay to move forward on that. I've been instructed that a new sheriff is in town, and that is no longer accepted. And so, yeah, you'll see some more of that in the next couple of months. And then we have some technical comments. These are pretty basic things about some errors in, where projects are located, no acronyms. There was one change in here that the Technical Advisory Committee made, technical comment number 4. It originally listed the Glen Highway Rehabilitation Project as being shown in the Anchorage and Matsu when it should have only been in the Anchorage. That was my error. I said the wrong project. So the Technical Advisory Committee just recommended to the sentence you see before you that there are several projects in the STIP that are incorrectly listed as Anchorage/Matsu when they're only either in Anchorage or Matsu. It's nice to have that kind of clear delineation so people know who to go to talk about the project, especially when it comes down to things like AMATS's CTP or CMAC allocation. It's listed as both Anchorage and Matsu, but it can only be spent within our boundary. So it's some confusion clear up there. So yes, the Technical Advisory Committee recommended approval with the edits I mentioned of this letter to send forward to the Department of Transportation for their comments on the STIP. Thank you.
Questions, comments?
Sure. I really appreciate these comments and thank you, Aaron, for detailing all of this. The assembly on Tuesday night passed a resolution, and we'll be providing our comments, the STIP as a body as well. But we certainly share some of the concerns that are detailed in this letter. I guess a question that I have, and I'm not sure if this is the venue to ask or who to ask, but how were projects in the STIP scored? What were they scored, and by what criteria? And I guess my follow-up question is there an opportunity to have the STIP project scored through the AMATS criteria? So maybe
For Aaron or
I can't really answer the first one because there was no information provided in the documents about the
I think
scoring.
it's a question for DOT that
Yeah.
I'm putting out there. If anyone wants to answer.
I can answer the second one though.
Sure.
Yes, I don't have information on that first. Taking notes and Aaron, okay, address this.
So the second one, yes, the STIP projects can be scored with the TIP criteria, and that's probably kind of what I'm alluding to for that second one is that, we as AMATS need to kind of take a look at our process on how we develop the TIP. And that we may have to start moving in the direction of scoring any project that's brought to us to be included in the TIP with our criteria. But again, it's only limited to the TIP. If we score these projects with the TIP criteria, it's only for us. It doesn't really mean it's not really the state's criteria that was set up. So it would only really be for us in our TIP, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess I'm just, I'm in need of more information on that point. And then just, the consultation required and I believe to be, as Aaron pointed out in the letter under item 6 there, under the major concerns, those projects that are not in the MTP, to me, I think legally cannot be in the STIP. And so I guess my question, and again, if anybody wants to take a stab at answering it, is sort of what is the plan to address these concerns and to make sure that the priorities of the NPOs and of the community are taken into account.
Sure. No, thank you. And I will address that part, just kind of from a broader perspective. DOT did meet with, Aaron and Fast as well, Fairbanks, on a bunch of these things. There's several things that impacted the document you all saw, and one, that's part of the reason we put it out for public comment and input is to find these things. I think there's some areas we could have done better and stumbled, and the coordination was one of those pieces. So we're working hard to rectify that and make sure that all the concerns and inputs are considered going forward. Another piece of this is infrastructure bill obviously dumped a lot of money into the highway programs with a lot of new programs needing to stand up pretty quickly where we don't actually have metrics and performance standard stuff developed yet for that. So that's part of the intent of this process is soliciting input on what might some of that look like. Certainly we work with the NPOs to make sure we're aligned on some of those items as well. The last piece, we were very focused on being as transparent on this one and utilizing a new process so that the public did have visibility into all the details that Aaron mentioned initially. They're showing where we're in the state we're using it, what the programs are being used, what is the fiscal constraint element. And in pulling a lot of that data out of our old system, ended up with some of the projects in there that hadn't been coordinated yet that we thought had. So that's how some of these fall in there as well. So those will certainly be addressed as we're going through the comments at the end of the period.
Thanks.
Yes.
I think that just gives credence to the need to extend up to 180 days while we iron out some items. And then additionally, one thing I'd love clarification on is just as time goes by, how that ranking system adjusts as new projects are put on, and how does older projects that either have or haven't moved forward, or as they languish, or as the needs change, I haven't fully wrapped around how that ranking system affects the necessity of a project over time as things, as the demographics of the community change, as things happen. So a project that might have been very important at some point, 5-7 years later, does it maintain, because it was important 5 to 7 years ago, does it still maintain that high level, or is there an adjustment period that says, hey, wait a second, we haven't moved on this over a certain amount of period, we should re-rank these? And I'd love to learn more about that. So thank you.
I have a broad question or comments. So some of the major comments appear could be, Aaron, they could be resolved with some specific coordination between DOT and AMATS. Others, maybe would be difficult to resolve. The major comment one, no coordination with AMATS prior to the draft document being released. Does the extension address that? Or some of these things, it seems like we're so far down the road, there is no resolution to some of the major comments. Is my understanding correct, or my impression correct?
I mean, that's kind of what it appears. And that's why I said it may be important to highlight it now, so it's not an issue later on, like it doesn't happen again. It's kind of up to DOT what to do with all these comments. The one that's the easiest to resolve, or the two that are the easiest to resolve, are really, well, actually three, sorry. Most of them are pretty easy to resolve. 1 and 2, I don't really know how to resolve those. But then the rest of them, 3, it's going to take some work, but you could easily do. And then 4 and 5 are pretty easy to resolve, just correcting the document. 6 is probably the hardest because it puts the most on AMATS. Because if AMATS, if these projects aren't in the MTP and the state wants to move forward with them, we have to add them to the MTP. So that's an MTP amendment. We have to remove them from the TIP, then add them back in the TIP, then they can get added to the STIP. So, it's a long, complicated process on there. So yeah, I think a few of them might be just heads up for next time, and the rest we can work with the state and get corrected.
And I think to build on that, Aaron, you correct me if I'm wrong, from our conversation with you and Jackson as well, in Fairbanks, was kind of just that point, because of the process involved with both of the MPOs. It definitely does lend itself to an extension, and we're making sure we're not bringing anything to a stop while we make sure we resolve some of the issues in the draft.
Yeah, I will say that, just as a heads up, because I know everyone's like, oh, cool, we'll add it to the MTP. An MTP amendment takes about 8 months to do. So we're well beyond the 180 days at that point. So I've given that information to DOT so they know, one of the things FHWA has asked of AMATS is to start shortening our amendment time period for both the TIP and the MTP because they are too long. And so this might be an opportunity for us to have a discussion on how we can make those a little more streamlined to help move everything forward.
I can comment on that really quickly. So as far as an MTP amendment goes, I guess I just don't necessarily want to like determine an outcome there. And, I don't want to necessarily amend the MTP to make the STIP work, right? Because some of these projects, I have some concerns about, for instance, the Track J access road. So I think it'll be interesting to go through that process and to try to make those things jive. But yeah, I guess I'm just planting a flag on that.
So Aaron, another follow-up question for item 6 in particular. The interpretation, the application of 23 CFR 450 would mean that if the MTP is not amended, that these projects could not be on the STIP. Is that how federal law applies?
Yeah, according to the feds who've reached out to talk to me about this, in its current form, the STIP cannot be approved with these projects in it because they're not in the MTP. Now, it also raises questions. A number of these projects are already in the TIP and already in the STIP. So how did they get in there without being in the MTP? And again, that's on me for not doing a good enough job with the gatekeeping, and I will eat the repercussions of that. And I apologize to everyone at DOT, the Muni and AMATS and the public, because it's going to be a long, complicated process to correct this error. But I think it just goes to show that AMATS needs to update its process to be more streamlined and in line with the federal requirements. FHWA looks at AMATS to be the gatekeeper of projects in our area. And if, we need to do our process diligently so it doesn't delay everybody else.
I got one more follow-up with this. Okay. So what's going to happen then if we aren't given more information about the state's scoring process, their criteria? Are we going to score those projects for the TIP then? What would the timeline, what would that look like?
That's kind of up to what the policy committee wants to do. So how it's going to work for the MTP, and just so you know, this is kind of a general process and it can be adjusted as need be, but the MTP is the amendment that has to happen first is we'll take the projects. And one note, I need a letter or an email from DOT asking for these projects to be added into the MTP. I will not just do it on my own. There needs to be some backup for this. And then once that's done, if it's done, we can start the MTP process. Take all these projects, we're gonna have to put them in the MTP. Well, the MTP is fiscally constrained, so some projects are gonna have to come out. So that's part of our process with the modeling we're gonna have to do, the air quality that we're gonna have to do, the extensive public process that we're gonna have to do. And I have to relook at the fiscal assumption, the fiscal constraint, and make sure everything matches up. And that's why it's really important to have this coordination and make sure we have our process outlined for it. The policy committee could vote to not include these projects in the MTP. And I believe that would be AMATS's decision on what it is. And then what we're told by FHWA, that means it can't be in the TIP and it can't be in the STIP.
Why aren't these projects currently in the MTP?
I believe all 4 of them are relatively new. I'll speak on the historical of the first one from my memory, and I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm wrong. When we did the 2040 MTP, there was a portion of this project put in the illustrative as well as like a PEL to take a look at the corridor, what to do, because it's the Seward Highway corridor from Rabbit Creek interchange roughly to Girdwood and what to do on that corridor. Because at the time, DOT's focus was on the Midtown congestion relief or the Seward to Glen PEL connections. And you can see that. I'm not making an assumption. You can see that in the projects that were selected. Those were the big ticket items. As with a lot of things, priorities change. And I believe this reflects a change in priorities as well as new projects coming online. And that's part of the thing that I don't think is communicated well enough to everybody, that if you want a new project in the STIP within the AMATS boundary, it's MTP first, then the TIP. And I think it's been a little lax over the years. That's being corrected right now. So that's why it seems so harsh, a punishment that we're all kind of going through. But I think once we kind of get our process in order and we streamline the AMATS process, it'll make it a lot more efficient for things. Projects that are going to be going in the MTP will be scored with the criteria that we had at the time for the 2040. So you'll be able to see those in comparison to other projects. And then it's up to the committee if you would like us to score these projects when we include them, if we include them in the TIP.
Thank you.
Okay, great discussion. Anything else from the committee members? Any comments from the public on this item?
This is a question for Aaron. Aaron, when
Please state your name for the record.
sorry, Matt Stitch, Bank of Health Department. So when we say a project needs to be in the MTP before it can be in the TIP or STIP, does it have to be within the constrained portion or can it be in the illustrative portion of the law?
It has to be in the fiscally constrained portion of the MTP.
And we do have a hand up online.
Okay, Emily Weiser.
Thanks. Yeah, hi, everybody. I just wanted to say thanks so much to Aaron for these comments. He said he's just doing his job, but I feel like you've really gone above and beyond that, Aaron, with finding things that should not have happened in the first place. And you've done a real service to the Anchorage public and the municipality for finding those, I think. I also wanted to comment that as a member of the public, the lack of the project selection criteria or any information around that has made it kind of impossible for me to comment on projects that are included in the STIP or not in the STIP, and trying to provide any justification for why I think there might need to be changes there. And then I don't know if this has come up in any other venue, but I did notice that there's at least one project missing from the user interface on the STIP website. So I really appreciate DOT's efforts in making that interactive interface. But the first project I looked for was the Seward Highway from Rabbit Creek to Bird Flats. And it is in the Airtable, that sort of spreadsheet looking thing, but it's not in the interactive interface where you can go to the map and you can zoom in on project locations. There's no pin for it there. Also, if you search in the interactive search function, it doesn't come up at all. So I did ask DOT staff about that. They said it was a mistake, that it was omitted. But a lot of members of the public are only going to use that interface. They're not going to bother with the spreadsheets, which are much less accessible. So as far as a lot of people can find out, they don't even know that project exists. So while I appreciate the efforts to make this more accessible, I do think that it's pretty clear this wasn't ready for public comment at this time. So I'm glad to hear there's talk about an extension and hopefully further public process. Thanks for all your work on this.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public? So, recap, this is a proposed letter to DOT. What is the role of the committee regarding the letter?
We move to adopt the letter and send to the recipients that are listed.
Second. Okay. Moved and seconded. Any objections? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm just moving on action items. And Yvonne, want to go ahead with your Submission there, the letter.
Sure, I guess I'll just speak to it briefly and then I'll have Aaron and listen as well. So Fish Creek Trail Connection is a project that the community is very excited about. It's going to be a lot of process, and would really be something that serves the community for decades, or longer. And it would be unfortunate if something that was going to be such a public good and be an asset to the community, if that were to be prevented from moving forward, essentially to serve the purposes of one private citizen or their family. And so what this letter does is ask the railroad corporation to really take this project into careful consideration when they meet and decide whether or not to accept the lease proposal for that project. Anyway, I guess I maybe would turn it over to Aaron to provide any other details.
A map. There is map online. Do you need like a map of the project?
I was just wondering where that, yeah, I just had it. I was gonna get visual reference, but I've got my notes open right here.
Okay, let me see if I can grab a quick map for the public.
Shoot. So here's the estuary.
Yep.
That's the railroad. This street.
Oh, right there.
I'll be taking the rail.com.
That's the wrong one.
Yeah.
There's also resources on it. Resources that show.
Oh, okay.
That would be already sure.
Okay, I still know where that is, you know, where it gets tied up and what kind of complications that creates, but. Well, visual learner.
Thank you. Under resources,
At the very bottom of the page.
Oh, just scroll down.
right here. Okay. Oops, your keyboard is driving me insane.
It's not very much.
Okay, sorry, everyone. We're trying to load up the map so you can see kind of the alternatives that are being proposed. So you can get an understanding of what this is looking at. Okay, so here's the Fish Creek Trail. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Okay, so real quick, it's connecting from Northern Lights. This is down past Lois as you're heading west towards Point Warnoff. And it's right at like the railroad bridge or this overcrossing that's like the pedestrian overcrossing, And so it's making a connection from this area here along the Alaska Railroad right away. And the preferred alternative or that's being looked at is this connection continuing along the Alaska Railroad right away. And I will zoom in to show you the area of concern. So at the very end of this area, there's this little switchback that kind of goes down here and connects. That's the preferred alternative, Alt N3A. And so the lease would be on like a triangle portion here that covers this Alt N3A. And so you may ask, well, why not just use Alt N3B or the other ones? That's, hugely impactful and hugely expensive. I'm going to throw out an estimate, but blame me if this is incorrect. Based on looking at it, about 9 million more for the project if we go with Alt N3B. And so I think what this letter highlights, and I do want to say thank you very much for the assistance of MOA Parks for writing this, a lot of this information in here and helping us once this was discovered. This connection is anticipated to bring a significant amount of use in the area, especially when you compare it versus a 95-year lease. That's a long time to tie up for, 328,000 trips annually for 95 years won't be able to use this segment. So that's, trying to get that info just so you guys kind of see and have more information there. Thank you.
I mean, please. I know that We have a couple people from the Parks Department here who are available to answer more specific questions about the current state of the project design if needed for the members. I was able to speak with them earlier in the week, so.
Any other question or comments this time from the committee? No. And then maybe ask anything to present from the parks and or just be available for. Okay,
No, it just seems, it seems logical and I would support this. It's, you know, you look at Alaska Railroad land as not officially public lands, but Alaska Railroad, you know, by the state, seems that we should be utilizing those lands for the greatest public benefit, not exclusionary to one individual or one specific special interest. So I would support it. Thank you.
are there any public comments on this topic? Yes, ma'am.
I'd just like to add that the trail is.
Sorry, state training for the record.
Thanks, Erin. I'm Taylor Keegan. I'm with Parks and Recreation. This project is also in the public interest because it promotes safety along the corridor. So that's one big positive aspect to the trail.
Thank you.
We do have a couple members online. Emily Weiser.
Thanks. Yeah, this is Emily Weiser again. Yeah, as a member of the public who rides a bike a lot, I've been really excited about the Fish Creek connector as improving non-motorized connectivity for our network. So yeah, I think it would be a real shame if that is no longer an option, both in terms of just connecting the existing Fish Creek Trail, which is sort of a fragment, to something that'll make it more accessible to more people, and also building out the non-motorized transportation network. Thank you.
Sorry, the next person we have is Anna Boson.
Hi, thank you. Anna Boson. I'm commenting as a member of the public on this particular project. I routinely used to bike with a trailer to pick up my daughter from the Boys and Girls Club in Spenard area and bike through the trail as much as I could until we got to Northern Lights area. And then, you know, it's a sketchy place to cross with young riders. And now my daughter is on her own biking as a 6-year-old. And every time we can improve the crossing to be more for all users and all abilities and all ages, I think is a huge benefit to improving independence for our young people and people later in life. So anything to support this moving forward and removing that obstacle of Northern Lights crossing. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. So I think the item before us here is whether or not to submit the letter from AMATS to the railroad highlighting these concerns. I have a motion.
Yep, I'll make that motion to submit this letter to the railroad.
Okay. So, and a second. Any objections? Motion is approved.
Thank you.
All right, I think our last action item, Aaron, is back to you there for the extension.
Yes, sir. Okay, so just a quick kind of reminder or heads up on what this item is. And I apologize, we don't have it on the screen for everybody, but it was kind of a last minute request from DOT. So as you know, the 24 through 27 STIP is out. The comment period ends September 3rd. DOT reached out to me this morning requesting an extension of the STIP for up to 180 days. So they're going to be making this request to FHWA and FTA, and they require concurrence from the MPOs. FAST, the Fairbanks MPO, has given their concurrence already and sent that on. And the letter you see before you right now is AMATS's concurrent with this, concurrence with this request. I think this request is positive for DOT and AMATS. One of the things is once the STIP is done, the TIP is also done. So that prohibits us from obligating any of our funding starting in FY24. So this extension allows DOT the time it needs to correct anything in the STIP and get it approved. as well as allows AMATS to continue obligating our federal funding. So I believe that this is a win for everybody, and it's a good way for us to collaboratively work together on the process. So the letter before you is signed from me. It could, of course, could be changed if somebody is not comfortable with me signing it, but typically it's been me just because it's from the policy committee through me to everyone. So, and you'll see all the CCs are, so it's just going straight to the page. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from the members committee? Seems pretty, straightforward. Any public comments on this item? Okay, then I'll entertain a motion to approve the letter.
So moved.
And second. Moved and second. Paul and Mr. Cross again. Okay, any objections? Okay, great. Motion is approved.
Thank you.
Okay, that takes care of all of our action items. Just now to project and plan updates. Congratulations, Eric.
Thank you. Now we move on to the easy stuff, hopefully. Okay, so first item before you is the obligation report, third quarter obligation report. So just a reminder, the obligation report is how are we doing at obligating our federal funding in the year? This is third quarter, so this is not current, this is not to where we are right now, but it ended at the end of June. It is fiscal year quarterly obligation, not calendar year. So fourth quarter, you will see once the fourth quarter is over and in like a month. Oh my God. So third quarter obligation, we required to be plus or minus 5%. That requirement is AMATS's policy requirement, not a federal requirement. And just as a reminder, this only takes into account TIP amendment number 1. It does not take into account the admin mod that you just approved. That still has to go to the state after your approval of it. If you scroll down to the very bottom, you will see that we are 2.8 million over programmed. And the reason for that is because of the SURSO funding, because a lot of stuff had to shift around. We haven't accounted for that shifting. So don't worry, we are not allowed to get a bunch extra money that we don't have available. The state does, and AMATS keeps very tight rein on that. So when we get to the fourth quarter, you will see an update to that information as best as we can. You know, I do want to say thank you to the state, specifically James Starzyk, who works very hard on helping to ensure that we are meeting our obligation deadlines. You know, we had kind of a lot of last minute obligation deadlines, as Mr. Kohlhaas knows, because we have last minute stuff that needed to be done. So, yeah, I'm here to help answer any questions that you may have on it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the committee? Any public questions? Great, then on to 6B.
Okay, 6B, this is just an update provided to us by Department of Transportation on the projects where we're at. It's third quarter, so we might as well get an update on all of our projects. Again, thank you for the state for putting this together. It's greatly appreciated that we can have a quarterly update on all the projects that AMATS is funding. As you can see, there's a lot of them. So, you know, it's really cool that AMATS has the ability to keep things moving forward and really help out the community in a variety of different ways. One thing that was added is, if you notice on the screen up here, if you want to go to the AMATS website, this obligation or this report on the projects is actually going to be on our website. If you scroll down a little, there's a button in yellow or greenish yellow on the left that says AMATS Quarterly Project Updates. So that is provided there for the public, committee members, and others who would like to see this on a regular basis. As a heads up, it will be just for the current one. If you want to go back and see historic, you'll need to go back to the agendas that we have for the committees. So I can help answer any questions, or I can pass it off to DOT if you have any specific things I can't answer. Thank you.
Any questions from the committee? Anything from the public? Yes, sir.
James Darcy, DOT Planning. I also wanted just to remind all of the committee members that this summary includes the project manager for each one of these. So if you do have further questions outside of this forum, you can contact any of the folks listed underneath the project to get that information.
Great. Thanks, James. Hey, Aaron, any more updates or anything for us?
No, sir, we're all done.
Okay. Moving on. Don't have anything listed for general information. See anything from anybody? Let's move into committee comments. Comments from the committee.
No comment. Thank you.
Great. And looks like our last opportunity for public comments. Yes, sir.
Zach Hartman, MOA Traffic Engineering. Just a quick update on a project you all heard about last committee meeting, the pilot protected bike lane along Pine McCary Street. Things have gone along smoothly and the plastic flexible posts and rubber curbs will start being sold, weather depending, on Monday. So we've been able to do it this year without the joint cooperation of the municipality, DOT, Bike Anchorage, and the assembly. So super excited. Keep your eye on social media and excited to see you out there on the bike in September. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Anything else?
Nothing online.
Hearing none. Okay. That is, you know, last couple of dates and events coming up there. Technical Advisory Committee 14 September. Next policy committee meeting will be 28 September. And I will entertain a motion to adjourn. So, third, we'll give you the second. We are adjourned.
You. I think I said your name wrong. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's right.